Hey everyone, it's your boy Anime Princess, welcoming you back to 3.22 Ancestor League with a brand new Spark Inquisitor League Starter Guide. This video is narrowly focused on the first couple days of the league to ensure you have the strongest league start possible, and it's complemented by a comprehensive Spark playlist that's meant to hold your hand throughout the entire rest of the league up until you make your character into a god by the end of it. This series should be helpful for any Path of Exile beginners as well as veterans. There's something in there for everyone. As for the 3.22 patch, we have had 0 nerfs to the build. In fact, we are getting Forbidden Sanctum back as a league mechanic. If you don't remember, Spark was the premier choice to run the mechanic, so that is great news. Let's just jump straight into this video, and I'll give a few reasons why I always love to league start Spark Inquisitor. I think one of the most important ones would be that Spark is a 1 character per league type of skill. And this is because there's so many vectors to scale your damage that you can just invest in it continually and the damage isn't going to plateau. I suppose the one exception would be Poison Spark, where there is that dot cap, but for any other Ascendancy, if you're not doing poison damage, you can just keep investing and the character will continue to grow meaningfully. So there's all the normal ways like increasing spell damage, crit multi, the more multipliers from supports. And then you can even get into stuff like projectile speed and skill duration, because sparks will just fire randomly and bounce around until they expire. So the more projectile speed you have, it lets the projectiles bounce around, come back and hit it again faster. Same with skill duration. So there's so many ways to increase that damage. It just feels really nice having your character grow continually until you finish the league. Another equally important reason I like Spark is because it's really easy on the hands. Now, when you're choosing a skill, if you don't want to have cramped up hands, I would advise choosing something which doesn't require aiming at all. So some examples of skills that are going to hurt your hand are stuff like Poison Concoction, Spectral Shield Throw, anything where you need to click on an enemy to actually hit them. With Spark, you never click on enemies, you just hold the skill down, just face in the general direction you want them to go. And honestly, even if you're in like a small room, you can face away from the enemies. It's going to hit the wall and like then bounce towards them. So yeah, wrist movement is horrible, at least for me. And there's no wrist movement in Spark. You just hold the button down. Very friendly on your hands. Now, as for the Spark skill itself, it can do all content. I would say for Spark Inquisitor, you're going to be strongest doing maps. And you could probably do your 4 Void Stones fairly easily because we're going to scale our damage pretty high, although it starts to struggle when you get into stuff like uber bosses, simulacrum, that sort of stuff. You're going to need to invest in it to be able to do that sort of content. But again, since this is a build where you just keep on investing and it keeps getting more powerful, you should be able to do all the content in the game, barring Uber Cyrus and Uber Steering Exarch, because those arenas are so big, you're never going to get your sparks to hit a second time. So if you're able to make a spark build that's able to do those 2 specific bosses, congratulations, you are a spark god. But yeah, aside from those 2 super niche things, Spark is able to eventually do everything. As for the build's weaknesses, I think in general, I just say the first few days of the league are going to be the hardest. It's a build that scales really well with investment. You're going to have absolutely no investment at the start. To help offset this, we do have a Spark playlist designed specifically for Spark Inquisitor. It's meant to hold your hand through the whole league. There's a bunch of videos showing you progression, giving you tips and tricks along the way, and it's especially focused on the first few days. Now, the Spark Inquisitor League Starter tree, for me personally, I don't think the defenses are adequate on the tree alone, which means you do need to pay attention to the gearing. Again, it's not expensive to fix your defenses with gear, and we go through it in the videos, but just be aware that you're not going to be invincible just by skilling the passive tree. You need to invest in the defensive layers. That aside, the other weakness would be wide open maps. And I think this is just inherent to how the skill works, right? Sparks will bounce around randomly and you want them to come back and hit the enemy multiple times. So your first mapping strategy, I would suggest picking a map that is small with narrow corridors. So a good example of a really popular one that is coming back for 3.22 is Crimson Temple, has the Apothecary drop. It's, there's tons of walls. So your sparks are going to come back and you're going to do high multiples of damage. And for that reason, the build's pretty bad at Legion because Legion needs an open map. So Leaguestart, don't do a Legion strat. Do a strategy that involves tight maps. And we do have videos on the channel with different Leaguestart strategies that are specifically catered to this type of play style. So I would suggest checking that out. I think maybe a third weakness to note would be if you are a beginner, bosses are not going to be easy. So your first 4 Void Stones, you could try and get the help of a boss killer. The fees are not that big. You just pay a one-time fee, you get your Void Stone, and you can go back to mapping. Again, I don't think this build is particularly weak to the 4 Voidstone bosses. Uber Elder is obviously going to be hardest, and if you have no experience with Maven, that's going to be really hard as well. Although, if you have played the game for a while, you should be fine. But yeah, just in general, for any new player, I would say go look for a boss killer, get those Voidstones fast. Moving on to the leveling portion of this video. So what we're looking at right now is my PoE file opened in the program Path Building Community Fork, and there's a link to both of those in the description if you want to follow along at home. So first off, on the tree tab, we are going to have various different trees corresponding to leveling deeper in the campaign. So there's level Lab 1, Lab 2, Lab 3, and then this is sort of early into maps. And we'll go over this in a second, but first off, we want to look at the notes. Now the notes section is equally, if not more important than the tree. And this is going to give you information on what to do in each of the acts and what gems and supports we want to be grabbing in each act as well. So this is pretty important to follow this to make sure you have a very smooth transition throughout the game. Right at the start, we see Act 1, Ranger Start. Now we're playing Spark Inquisitor, which is a Templar, but we're actually starting on a Ranger. This is because Ranger has access to some gems that Templar simply doesn't. So this is called a Ranger Mule. If you've never done this before, I just uploaded a video the other day called Spark Inquisitor Leaguestart to Maps, and it's like 5.5 hours long. I run through the whole campaign. You probably want to watch the first 15 minutes because you'll see how I do the Ranger Mule. Essentially, you just make a ranger, you do the first few quests, which are going to give us momentum, pierce, and sniper's mark. Then we can throw those in our stash tab, delete the character, create our spark character. So now we're going to have our level 1 Templar in Act 1. The first thing to note is I have a favor using scepters over wands, and this is going to be because of something later on in Act 1. So just keep in mind we want ideally to have scepters. So our 3-link in Act 1 is going to be Spark, Pierce support, which we get from the Mule, and added Lightning. This is going to be very, very strong. It will carry us through the entire campaign, actually. Hopefully we'll get a 4th link, but if we don't, this will be good enough. As for the supplementary skill gems, we do have Frostblink, which is a movement skill, and we will link that with Arcane Surge. Now, Arcane Surge we want to keep as low level as possible. The only reason we have this is every time the skill it's attached to spends a certain amount of mana, Arcane Surge gives us a buff that increases our mana regen and also a little bit of cast speed. Now, the lower level Arcane Surges, the less mana you need to spend to proc it. So when we get Arcane Surge, you want to right-click that gem instead of left-clicking it on the first level up, and that's just going to disable it from gaining levels. So ideally, we want Arcane Surge like level 2, level 3. If you forget, that's fine. Just try and keep it as low level as possible. Now, the next supplementary gem is Frostbomb. And this, we're only going to hold on to from Act 1 and Act 2. It is very good in conjunction with Frostblink early. So we're going to be running through the acts. We're going to be Frostblinking to go faster, right? But we also want to drop Frostbomb in front of us when there's a pack there, and then Frostblink through it, because both of these do damage, and combined, they're likely going to kill that pack, and we don't even need to stop and waste time shooting spark at them. Like, this is all really smooth, really efficient. Frost Bomb, Frost Blink feels great. Also, we're going to need Frost Bomb for Act 2. The next link is Sniper's Mark. Sniper's Mark causes the enemies to take more damage, and you just cast it once and it's going to be permanently on that enemy until you die or it dies. So save this for really tough enemies like Act bosses. That's when we're going to be using that. Now, my favorite supplementary gem is Holy Flame Totem because it has so much different utility. First off, it gives regen to stuff in a small AoE around it, so this is going to be healing us. It's also a totem, which means the enemies are going to be attacking it. So if you're fighting a boss 1v1, you can sort of kite the boss, and the boss is going to get distracted, and it's going to start hitting your totem, which is going to help you. Also, Holy Flame Totem does a lot of damage, and it does even more damage if the enemy is Sniper's Marked, and it'll also like shoot out extra projectiles into AoE against a Sniper's Marked enemy. So again, it's just very convenient to use this on bosses in conjunction with Sniper's Mark. Now, Flame Wall, I would say, is an optional supplementary skill gem. It's something you just put on the ground underneath the boss. And also, when your sparks go through it, they'll catch on fire and do more damage. Orbistorms is the final option for supplementary gems. And for me, I generally don't use this until Act 3 because you want to drop Frost Bomb in Act 3 for Orbistorms. Technically, you could use it earlier, but I don't think you're going to have the gem sockets. Now, we want to pick up Clarity because this gives us mana regen. And at the end of Act 1, we're going to get Leap Slam. And Leap Slam is an attack that moves us, and it moves us faster than we can walk. So we're going to stop running around, and we're just going to Leap Slam all over the place. And the thing is, you can only use Leap Slam with scepters, axes, swords, etc. You can't use it with wands. So that is why we are looking for scepters. All right, so by the end of Act 1, what we're going to be doing, again, Leap Slamming around, and when your Frost Blink is off cooldown, you're also going to cast that, because you can Leap Slam and Frost Blink, and they both move you. Stuff is going to be much faster. On to Act 2. Now we're going to start looking for a heavy belt on the ground, because this will give us a bunch of strength, which is the requirement for these red gems. And since Inquisitor, its area on the tree mostly gives us intelligence, we are going to be low on strength. So again, look out for a heavy belt. In Act 2, you're also going to have the choice between killing the bandits. You want to kill Creighton, kill Oak, and save Alira. And this is where Frost Bomb comes in handy, because Oak is really hard to kill unless you stop his regen, and Frost Bomb stops regen for 5 seconds around. So just make sure when you're fighting Oak, drop the Frost Bomb. He'll die much more easily. After you kill Oak, you can just throw your Frost Bomb on the ground. You don't need it anymore. As for skill gems, there's only 2 to grab in Act 2, which is Herald and Thunder and Herald of Ice. And both of these are like Clarity, where they reserve your mana, but they give us benefits, which is extra damage as well as explosions and lots of thunderbolts that just hit stuff as you run around. Now moving on to Act 3, there is going to be a quest that gives you a rare amulet as a reward, and you want to go for the Jade Amulet because this gives us dexterity. And again, we're in an area where there's mostly intelligence on the skill tree, so for all these green gems, we're going to need to have a bunch of dex. So that's the reasoning for this. Also, later on in Act 3, you are going to kill a boss in the Lunaris level 2 zone, and there's going to be a crafting recipe on the ground that gives us lightning damage to spells. So at this point, you can go to your hideout and on the crafting bench, spend 4 transmutations to craft lightning damage to spells on your scepters, and that will give us a bunch more damage. You're going to need 8 transmutes to do both of them. If you have less, maybe just craft it on 1. Now, you'll see a bunch of gems with a library in the parenthesis, and this is because these gems are only available if you do an optional quest in the library in Act 3. And inspiration support, this is going to be our 4th link as soon as we drop one. Blue, blue, green, red are the colors we want. Since we've dropped Frostbomb, we're no longer using Frostbomb. Now we are using Orbistorms, and we're going to want that in a 3 link with Innervate, and Ice Bite, and those can only be bought in the library. Once we grab the Orb of Storms 3-link, it's going to change how we start fighting enemies. So now, as we're leap slamming, we're going to leap slam in the middle of a pack of enemies, preferably a pack of blue enemies because they give a lot more XP. Drop Orb of Storms at your feet and start casting Spark. And when you cast Spark while inside the Orb of Storms, it will shoot out a lot of extra damage. It will also buff your damage, and it will chill enemies around you. So it's just a lot of extra damage in that area. We're going to get a lot more clear. So yeah, just keep leap slamming forward. It's almost a melee skill at this point. Now, later on into maps, obviously we're not going to be using Orb of Storms anymore, but for the first few days, this is just a lot of damage. This get in the face, Orb of Storms, Spark, very powerful. That's going to take us through the rest of the campaign playing like this. All 3 of these gems are going to cost an Orb of Chance, so make sure you're looking out for Orb of Chances as you're running through the campaign. Yeah, we already have Sniper's Mark. Determination, this is a defensive aura that gives us armor, so we can drop Clarity, or if that doesn't work, you can drop one of the Heralds instead, but you should be able to drop Clarity at this point. And at the end of Act 3, we will also have finished the first lab. So let's go quickly over the first part of the passive tree. So this ends at the end of Act 3. For Templar, we're going to path through here first. We're going to go down here, since we need dexterity for those green gems. This gives us a bunch of dexterity. Over here, just a bunch of life, damage, resistance. Very nice. Now, if you are an experienced player, you probably already know this, but you can path up here to Dark Arts. It's going to give us some attack speed, and this is going to give us some extra damage, but you won't be able to use 2 scepters. You're going to have to do some weird stuff with like an axe in one hand, maybe a scepter in the other. But I don't want to recommend this in my guide because you're going to have to unspec this later with regrets. We have a lot of damage already. So if you do want to go fast, a little bit faster at least, and you do know this tech, go for it. But for all new players, I would just go with the standard thing I have here, which is after we have all of this, we are going to path down here and fill out this wheel. And once you fill out the whole wheel, you can grab the mastery in the middle. This is why we're coming down here, because this mastery is very strong. Hits have 25% chance to treat enemy monster resistance values as inverted. This is really good for boss damage. So we're going to grab that. And the other huge source of damage on this first tree is coming up here. Ellie Overload disables crits. And yes, we are a crit build, although that comes later because early in the game, a crit's not going to do a lot of damage. So this is going to give us 40% more damage, but our crits no longer do the double damage because crit multi base is double damage. And we just fill out the rest of this tree. Points down here are nice because they give us strength and dex, which we definitely do need. So that's the reasoning for this. And once you have all of this and you're at the end of Act 3, you're going to want to go into the first Eternal Labyrinth, kill Azaro, and after that, we ascend to Inquisitor and we grab Sanctuary. Now, after that, we're going to move on to the second passive tree down here. But let's go back to the notes. Right now we're in Act 4. As you can see, from Act 4 all the way to the end of the game, there is very little difference in our gems. We're just pretty much set from here on out. So Act 4, I have a note. You could drop Added Lightning for Spell Echo. It will be more damage. I don't think we need that extra damage. The downside of Spell Echo is it will make you cast Spark twice before you can move again. So it's going to feel like you're kind of like stunning yourself. But this is an option. You can do it. For Act 5 and Act 6, I am saying you can pick up Sigil of Power. You can pick up Tornado. Honestly, these are things you're going to use like when you're level 80, level 70, just when you're into the maps. But at this point in the game, you don't really need to use them because you have enough buttons as it is. Now for Act 6, there is a note. Actually, we'll make this white. You want to cap your Ellie resistances now. And in order to do that, well, it's the same as how we crafted the extra lightning damage on our scepters in Act 3, you go to your hideout, go to the crafting bench. On your gears, if there's an open suffix, you just craft some res on it. Hopefully, it should be enough. You should have enough open suffixes to get you res cap, because we do get a lot of res on the tree just coincidentally. And for Act 7, now there's a note that as soon as we get the Sovereignty passive on the skill tree, we can drop Herald of Thunder for Zealotry, because Zealotry is going to be more damage. And let's go back to the passive tree so I can explain that. Okay, so actually for Lab 2, we don't get Sovereignty yet. Sovereignty is out here. But we're just going to just fill out everything. So for the order, what I'd recommend is to grab Dreamer first, because this reduces the mana cost of skills. Also, this mastery, very important, increases mana reservation efficiency of skills, so you can reserve more mana. This feels so nice. Everything else, just get what you want. In fact, you know what? I think I want to make a change here. I want us to get Sovereignty earlier instead of this skill effect duration. So yeah, we'll do this before Lab 2, and after we do Lab 2, we are going to grab Pious Path up here. And this top half of the tree is going to give us lots of regen all the time. It's just going to make the build feel very nice. And now this final little bit down here for Lab 3, this is going to take us all the way to the end of the campaign, most likely. And as you can see from the notes, there's really no more gem changes. At the bottom, I do have a little review just so you can make sure your gems are somewhat on track after you start entering maps. But really, we have stopped changing our gems, basically at the end of Act 3. All right, so yeah, just fill this out. There's really not much commentary here. It doesn't really matter the order. We're going to be pretty powerful no matter what. Right before you kill Katava, you have the option of going to do the third lab, kill Azaro a third time to get Righteous Providence. However, the third lab can be pretty hard on a league start when you just have really poor gear. And this actually doesn't do much until we get the fourth lab as well. So what I would normally do on a league start is after I'm ready to go do the third lab, I'll just skip it, go right to Katava, kill Katava, and start doing endgame maps, start getting more levels, start farming some Chaos Orbs to upgrade my gear. And then we are going to be on the fourth tree where we're getting ready to swap over to crit. So as you can see, basically most of the changes here aren't going to increase our power. It's going to give us critical strike chance, but we're still going to have Ellie Overload spec'd probably. So like there, it's not going to do anything. But as soon as you do the final lab, so we'll do lab 3 and lab 4 together because we'll have got some better gear. This node is the node that makes crit so strong for Inquisitor. It reads critical strikes ignore enemy monster resistances, so we just suddenly do massive damage to bosses once we are crit capped. So yeah, we get lab 3, lab 4, and at the same time we will unspec Ellie Overload to enable our crits. And this is what the tree will look like. As for these progression and maps, this is where you can actually start looking at the item and skill sets. So for budget endgame white yellow maps, I am suggesting we buy Singularity. It's probably like 2 to 5 chaos on a league start. It is a lot of damage. There is actually YouTube videos in the playlist that go over in more detail exactly like what are the super cheap items you can buy. There's even trade links in them, so feel free to use that resource as well. But this just shows you sort of example of what sort of stuff you could have. Again, like white yellow maps, we're getting ready to fight Azaro, and probably when we get to red maps, we'll try and fight him, and then we will crit swap. So the crit swap, there's a new set of gear here. Again, this is just rough examples, and also in the playlist there is videos going over this. And also we want to be going over these skill gems because skill gems change with the crit swap. So when we are in maps, before we kill those 2 labs, the 2 final labs, we're likely going to have a 5 link, going to be Spark, Spell Echo, Pierce, Inspiration, Lightning Pen. There's all the other gems over here as well. And then once we swap to crit, we are going to have increased critical strike support in there, and we're going to drop lightning penetration, because remember, the 4th lab means we penetrate all resistances, so we don't care about penetration anymore. So we're essentially going to get an extra link for free, and if you're on a 6th link, you would put increased critical damage. Now here, I want to talk about crit capping. When you swap over to crit, you want to get as close to 100% crit as possible, and you are going to need to import your own character into PoE to figure out how much crit you have. So let's just see. This character has 97.87% crit, which is very good. And let's go over all the sources of crit. So once you import your character, if you want to see your sources of crit, well, first of all, make sure you select Spark up there, and then you want to go to the Calculations tab and select Spark. And you'll see crit chance right here. You see 97.87. And it will have a list of every single source of crit you have, and you can compare it to this PoE to see all the different spots where I'm getting my crit chance. You can also join the Discord and get some ideas of where to get crit chance. Some of the big ones, let's just talk about the biggest ones. So Frost Shield, this is a skill gem. This gives us a lot of crit. Also, the skill gem, increased critical strike support. This is a crazy amount of crit. For the items, you can get crit chance on a rare shield. At this point, you will need to have a shield, because on the skill tree, we are speccing into Spell Block, and Spell Block needs a shield because we're going to be using Tempest Shield. You can get a lot of crit for very cheap on a shield, and obviously on the skill tree as well, a ton of crit right here, a lot of crit right here. So again, you can look into detail right here of exactly where all the crit is coming from, but I've covered the biggest sources of it right here. Again, hitting 100% crit, or at least close enough, like 95, 97, extremely important to this build. All right, on to Pantheons. So you can find the Pantheons in the configurations here: Major God, Brine King, Minor God, Yugal. And I actually want to talk about these Pantheons a little bit as well. Spark has the option to go self-chill, and one of these Pantheons can brick self-chill. So you probably don't want to grab it, just to keep your options open. So for Brine King, we love Brine King because it has immunity to freeze. That's great. So you want to capture this boss, and you don't want to capture this boss because this reduces effective chill on you, and this will brick self-chill. So just keep that in mind. Self-chill is an option in the super late game. We can transition our build into a self-chill build. It's very easy to do, but if you grab this node, you can't self-chill. So just grab this and do Brine King. And then Soul of Yugal is very nice because you get 50% reduced reflected damage. And also the reduced effect of curses is nice because this combines with Zealotry, which also reduces the effect of curses. So we're not going to get affected by curses. I think it's like 20% effect of curses on you. And yeah, this 50% reduced reflected damage gets combined in the late game with a node right here for 60% reduced reflected elemental damage taken. So you get 100% reflect immunity, and we're able to do this because the inversion mastery becomes useless as soon as we finish Uber Lab, because Uber Lab is changing penetration, but we don't need pen. ignore resistances, so we would be unspecking that as well as the Elite Overload. That's a way to get Reflect immunity. And I think a third thing to mention for the Pantheons is if you are doing the red Searing Exarch altars, you probably want to grab Soul of Aberrath. This is just for any build out there. If you're doing the red altars, just temporarily spec into this for less ignite on you and this burning ground stuff. At this point in your progression, you should be well into red maps since you've done Uber Lab and done the crit swap. So you really should be graduating from the Leaguestart guide and moving on to my Spark content playlist. Although I know there is going to be some people who just want to only use the Leaguestart guide and YOLO the rest. So I want to at least leave you with these 3 things to focus on. And by the way, this is also in the Spark content playlist. The first thing would be, if you aren't using it already, consider using a Singularity Scepter. It fits the playstyle of leap slamming in front of an enemy and just like almost meleeing them to death with Spark. And this is a really good playstyle early on before we get all the prod speed, when we still have the Orbistorms and everything. It can take us quite far through maps. Although after you do the crit swap, you do want to switch. You're not dual wielding scepters anymore. You're going to be using a shield, because in red maps, you're going to want spell block and you need Tempest Shield with the shield for that. So at some point, you will graduate to a rare weapon. But yeah, if you don't have enough damage, use the Singularity. Second thing would be, I strongly advise you get a well-ruled strength helmet, because you are not going to have enough armor in red maps. You're going to need to get it on gear. And you can get a lot of armor from a strength-based helmet. You can easily get between 700 and 1,000 for pretty cheap. Again, there are trade links to all these things in the Spark content playlist. So if you want that, you can start heading over there. The third thing to focus on is you need that helmet to also have an open suffix, because you want to have the Junecraft trigger socketed spells when focused. Because inside the helmet, you're going to 4-link it, and you're going to put Tornado, Sigil of Power, Frost Shield, all linked to a life tap support. And this is going to, combined with the June suffix, give you a button on your hotbar, and when you press it, it instantly shoots all those spells off. And those spells all have cast times. So this is not just about consolidating 3 buttons into one focus button. It's also about skipping cast times. And you cannot be having these cast animations when you're fighting a boss. You need all this to go off instantly. This is important. So again, this is the point in the Leaguestart video where you really want to graduate and start using the Spark content playlist. And also, you feel free to join my Twitch channel or the Discord. There's like 1,000 Spark players in the Discord. They're all very helpful. They've all played Spark Inquisitor for the most part. And, if you just have a quick question, I'll probably be live. I'm live on Twitch whenever I'm playing the game, basically. So you can just pop in, have a quick question. I'll point you in the right direction. But yeah, this kind of wraps up the Leaguestart aspect. We will have more to Leaguestart guide to talk about, defenses, some sort of unique items you want, and let's move on to that right now. Spark Inquisitor defensive layers. It's important you understand the reasoning behind each of these layers, because it's not only achieved through the passive tree, it's also achieved through gearing. So you'll be able to troubleshoot your build shortcomings by understanding what each of these things accomplishes. These are ordered roughly in terms of importance. Number 1, high spell block, important versus bosses, also important versus mapping. Try and get 75% if you can, and try and get it without using glancing blows, because it's a lot stronger without glancing blows. Next one is armor combined with physical damage reduction. Now, physical damage reduction is a stat that you can get from endurance charges. It's also just a stat you can get on like body armor. You can get it from a few various places. It's particularly important for mapping, for when a lot of small monsters are hitting you. Next one is freeze and chill, and we get this through wearing a Call of the Brotherhood, and this is useful, especially for mapping. Chill reduces monster action speed by 30%, and this will make, you're going to get hit a lot less. And freeze just stun locks them, which is great. Another good reason to freeze is it will shatter the corpses. So, for example, if you're opening a strong box and it's going to detonate all the corpses around it, I mean, if you've frozen everything, you're not going to die to that big explosion because there's going to be no explosion. Next defensive layer is the life and energy shield regeneration. Now, this is just part of our ascendancy. The consecrated ground works for both life and energy shield. So it's doubling up if we're able to take energy shield and life damage at the same time. Again, this is just useful for everything. The second last one is attack block. Useful, well, honestly, it's useful for everything, I guess, particularly for mapping. And if you are using an Aegis Aurora, this becomes very, very useful for mapping. This is how builds become like pseudo invincible, where you just stand and tank hundreds of enemies hitting you at once. It's with attack block and spell block cap and an Aegis Aurora. The final defensive layer is curse reduction. If you use Solar Yugal, as well as our ascendancy, which gives us consecrated ground, we are 80% curse reduction, which means stuff like just any curse on a map is not going to have much effect. And if you can get an additional 20% curse reduction, you will be completely curse immune. Although I think 80% is already very good. So this is a pretty strong baseline right here. Let's run through some of the unique options we can add to the build, starting with most budget and working our way up. First on the list, Voliko's Sign. Now this gives us a little bit of life leech. You only need one source of life leech on Spark because we do a lot of damage. It's taking up a ring slot. I don't know. This is something you can use day one. It's a 1 chaos. Nothing crazy there. Next one is Singularity, which most of you guys should be using early on in the league. Let's go over the stats. It is 10 to 200 lightning damage to spells. That's quite high. 18% cast speed is respectable. The 8% reduced mana cost of skills is going to feel nice because we are not going to be stacking too much mana reduction early on. So this is going to make it feel more comfortable. The last two mods sort of work in tandem. Nearby enemies are hindered and 100% increased damage with hits against hindered enemies. So for nearby, that is approximately the distance of a Frostblink, just for reference. So if you're stacking two of these, suddenly you have 200 damage when you're nearby, and you have all this other damage as well, because there's a lot of damage on these. It's very, very high amounts of damage, and these are probably like 2 to 5C, and I would try and live search to get one with a decent roll. You might as well. But even a poorly rolled one's still going to be very good. All right, next up on the list, Call of the Brotherhood. Now this does not necessarily increase our damage. It's just converting the damage to cold. And this is our defensive layer. So yeah, you can expect to pay probably, I don't know, 15 to 25 chaos on a Leaguestart, something like that. Next up, Call of the Void. This is just not available early on because it is a boss drop. It's an alternative to Call of the Brotherhood. For later on, there is a video in the playlist just contrasting the two. All right, next up, Doriani's Invitation. This is a belt. It gives us a source of lightning leech. So you could use this or you could use Voliko's. It happens to have some decent resist on it. Has armor, which we like. Has some lightning damage. It's a heavy belt, so it has strength. There's a lot of nice things on this. So, you know. The one thing to note here is there are many different variations, so make sure you get the one with lightning damage, or I suppose if you do have Call of the Brotherhood, you could get the one with cold damage, but there's like fire, fizz, I don't know, you have to get the appropriate type for our damage. All right, next up on the list is the Magnate. Now, this gives us a lot of strength, gives us some decent ult res. And there's the line 10% chance to deal double damage when you have at least 200 strength. And we do stack attributes. So it's very easy to hit 200 strength. And that's going to give us a lot of damage. The 400 strength is stretching it. You don't even have to get the triple damage for this to be good. But again, you know, I'm not saying you need to get this belt. This is just an option out there. Generally, this is somewhat expensive on a Leaguestart. So I tend to avoid it. I would say it can be upwards of 70 chaos on a league start, depending on what the meta is. All right, next up is Death Rush. So if you can get it decently rolled, like maybe a roll of 2 seconds on kill for Adrenaline, it's going to feel really nice. Adrenaline's great. You can look up the stat if you want. It's, what is it? 100% increased damage, 25% attack, cast, movement speed, and also 10% fizz damage reduction. All of those things are amazing. This is a great ring. Call the Brotherhood, 1 slot, Adrenaline from Death Rush in the other slot. Next up on the list is Heat Shiver, and I'm actually having this here, and I'm sort of not recommending it. Now, I'm aware I did use this last league, and it did work pretty good, although let me talk about the downsides of this. So, Heat Shiver is all this extra fire damage is conditional on us freezing the enemy, and you can't necessarily freeze the really tanky enemies on Spark because it's based on the magnitude of your hit, and Spark has really high cast speed, but not necessarily an extremely high hit. So ways to sort of fix this are to increase freeze duration, but that involves some investment on the tree. Probably it involves using your Anoint. So also, Heat Shiver means you need to have 2 Call of Brotherhoods, and both of them need to be fully catalyzed with the elemental catalysts. So Heat Shiver is really high PoB damage, and it is really high damage, conditional on freezing. I would recommend going with the rare helmet. I would not recommend doing this. I am not going to do this ever again. I feel like, yes, we did do our Void Stones on this, but it would have been easier if I had the rare helmet. All right. Yeah, so that's a nope in my opinion. Next up, Glorious Vanity for Doriani. Now, this gives us Corrupted Soul, and Corrupted Soul gives 15% of your life as extra maximum energy shield, which is great, because we like to have both life and energy shield. This is just like a 1 jewel investment, and you have all the energy shield you need. And the other node is usually a downside, but it's actually an upside for us. It is 50% of non-chaos damage bypasses energy shield. So it means whenever you take a hit, you're taking half of it on your life and half of it on your energy shield. And for Inquisitor, we get our life regen also on our energy shield through Pious Path, like our Consecrated Ground affects both. So when you make sure you're always taking some amount of damage on your life, you're essentially doubling your regen. Corrupted Soul is insane value, and this is generally not too expensive. Now, you want to get one that this transforms all the nodes in the area, and you want to get one that transforms the nodes in a positive way for the build. Again, check the Spark content playlist on how to choose a timeless jewel. It will show you how to get a really overpowered one. All right, next up is Aegis Aurora. This synergizes very well with attack block and spell block, which are defenses that we like to get. This is like the biggest reason why this build is super tanky. But you can't just slap this on. Again, you need to have the spell block and the attack block, and that's covered in the deep dives, don't worry. Shows you how to scale that. But yeah, this in conjunction with the rest of the defenses is amazing, right? This next unique is normally one of the first chase uniques. I am just saving up to try and get early because this goes up in price. It's Ashes of the Stars. If you get this early, maybe pay like 6 to 15 div, depending on how early. It's gonna keep going up, probably to 30 div. I'd say this is core on Spark Inquisitor. Love this. The quality to skill gems is great. A lot of our skill gems have really good quality options on them. You know, it's proj speed on Spark. I could just list them all, but that would take forever. +1, the level of our Spark is great. The increased reservation efficiency of skills works for mana and for life. So actually having a high roll of this is important when we set up our Petrified Blood to go low life, but that is like pretty far into progression when you're going to do that. But yeah, this is a key piece of Spark Inquisitor. I would say try and get reservation efficiency at least 18. You know, even higher than 18 is probably better. For the quality of skill gems, this doesn't matter as much. Obviously, higher is better. I would be perfectly fine with 18 reservation efficiency and min roll on this. It would be okay. The top line for increased experience, it doesn't matter. All right, so we are going into Forbidden Flame and Flesh options now, and these can get really expensive. They might not be too expensive. It all depends on the supply and demand. So the first one is Conviction of Power. I really like this one. It gives you 4 minimum endurance charges, 4 minimum power charges. You're going to have these at all times. So basically, the power charges are giving you 200% increased critical strike chance, and the endurance charges, those are giving you a bunch of fizz damage reduction. I think it's 4% each, so it's giving you 16% fizz damage reduction. It's also giving you 16% to all elemental resistances. Very, very high value here. Next one, Forbidden Flame and Flesh for Arcane Blessing. This gives you Arcane Surge when you hit, and this effect gives you 20% more spell damage. So it's sort of like a sort of mid 7th link. Normally you can get more than 20% more on a link, but I mean, this is pretty close to a link. I'd say this is great. It's pretty good. It's an option. I've never used it myself, but you know, it's something to consider. Next one, Sanctuary of Thought, which is a bunch of stuff. You get some extra energy shield. You get 25% mana reservation efficiency of skills, which is you know, helps you fit in more auras. And the area of effect does not matter. It's pretty good. Something to consider. And the last Forbidden Flame, Forbidden Flesh is Bastion of Hope, and this was just buffed in the current patch. So now if you've attacked and cast recently, you're going to have 25 to attack block, 25 to spell block, and you are going to be shield charging all the time as well as casting Spark all the time. So you will always have this buff active. It's a lot of defense. This is something worthy of consideration. There's obviously going to be more uniques you could choose, but I think we're just going to wrap this up with the final one for me, and that would be Mage Blood. I think this is the belt I prefer. I like this over Headhunter. Again, this is extremely expensive, but you slap this on, any version of Spark is going to feel amazing. All right, that wraps up the uniques. Hope that gave you some ideas of stuff you can throw into the build. I think we should end this video talking about the 3 main destinations where you can end up at the end of the league when you Leaguestart Spark Inquisitor. The first one would be if you simply followed my Spark content playlist all the way to its conclusion, and that would be just hundreds of little incremental upgrades to make a very defensively sound build. I think I ended the league around 50 million damage in 3.21, so we had a lot of damage. We were very tanky. It was a well-balanced build. The second option would be to do something similar, except somewhere along the way, you will transition over to self-chill and then keep making those incremental upgrades. And one way to do it would be in the self-chill guide in the Spark content playlist on my channel. The video was, I think, 2 leagues ago. I think it was Forbidden Sanctum. It's possible 3.22 may introduce new ways to self-chill, but I mean, I can't read into the future, so as of now, I would just say that video is the way to go. Self-chill is really fun. You just zoom around the maps so fast. I highly recommend this. I think you will enjoy self-chill. And if you want to make the self-chill wand, video on my channel called Perfect Wand Craft. It goes over self-chill as well as non-self-chill wands. And the final destination, I think a lot of you guys can guess, it's Aura Stacker. Now, I want to temper expectations on Aura Stacker if you're not investing mirrors. It is not a perfect build at all. I think it's been glorified to a certain level where it's not particularly tanky. It can't do all map mods. I don't think it's well rounded, but I mean, if you do have the proper investment and you're not skipping any corners, you're investing in Mage Blood, you're actually crafting like perfect gear, it will be very good. But just keep in mind, it is not well balanced unless you do that. It is not tankier than a well balanced normal Spark. Definitely not. And if you do Aura Stacker, you are going to be constantly hitting Smite on enemies because most of your damage comes from Phantasmal Smite. You need to have Righteous Fire on, or else you also do no damage. And having Righteous Fire on with some map mods means all your regen is just going to be like counteracting that, and you take a bunch of hits on your Petrified Blood. Every hit's going through because you can't do full block. You need to do Glancing Blows block. So like there's nothing to regen your Petrified Blood. Like it's not an invincible build unless you put in the money. So my advice, don't switch to Aura Stacker too early. It's always safer to switch later when you have every single piece of gear than trying to rush things. But yeah, that's my little spiel. I hope you enjoyed the Spark Inquisitor guide. I think I made this guide way too long this league, but whatever. It is what it is. Feel free to join the Discord and make some Spark friends in there. And I don't know, I hope to see you on Twitch when League starts. All right. See you around.